What's up, guys? Static in the Attic. I thought I'd start this one off with a little bit of scientism. Scientism is this new religion where you have just blind belief that there are some scientists out there that know everything and they got it figured out, so don't even bother. So this is the coelacanth fish that it's been extinct for 66 million years. So it was extinct before the supposed evolution of the dinosaurs, and then they roamed the earth for millions of years. So this thing's been gone for a really long time. But check out this article. A fossil fish that predates dinosaurs and was thought to have gone extinct has been found alive in the West Indian Ocean off the coast of Madagascar. Some guys were out shark fishing and they pulled this thing up in the nets. It got around to the experts at some point and they said, hey, it's a extinct fish. So in the article, they say that the scientists looked into this a little further and we were astounded by the numbers that were being caught, even though there's been no proactive process in Madagascar to monitor and conserve coelacanths. So it's because of no regulation that they caught the extinct fish. And then they go on to explain that they're using gill nets that are used to catch sharks at a deeper level. And now that they're catching these extinct fish, they want to ban the use of those nets. Not surprisingly, there is nowhere in the article that they mention the fact that this was supposed to be extinct for 66 million years. I mean, evidently this happens so often that they have a name for it. It's called a Lazarus taxon. So it's an extinct animal that comes back from the dead mysteriously. That's scientism for you. And that's what happens with all of our dating. Literally all of our dating of the medieval, dark ages, ancients, all came from a couple guys in the 15th and 16th century. And then archaeologists go dig through everything, and their method of dating is the deeper it is, the older it is. But just look what they're digging through. You know, their story is cultural layers. It builds up gradually over time. Guys, I've worked on houses from the built in the 50s. There's old barns out in the field from, the early 1900s that you can still open the door because the ground hasn't gone up a foot or two over the last 100 years. And just look what they're digging through. There's big fist size and larger rocks out there. When was the last time you went to mow the yard and you had to move a bunch of cultural layer boulders out of your yard? It just doesn't happen, and the only thing I can think of is some type of catastrophe, probably just a flood, but this is not a gradual layer thing. This happened all at once. And I think the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Romans, the ancient Greeks were all, that time period was just 500 to 800 years ago. And it is thanks to Joseph Justus Scaliger and Dionysius Petavius, notice the still Roman name. These two guys are responsible for all of our chronology of the ancient ages. They're the ones that decided this happened at, 0 AD. This happened at 300 BC. And there are numerous mathematicians like Anatoly Fomenko and even Isaac Newton that have done things like calculated the eclipses that are in ancient accounts and said there's no way that it happened at that time period. Now, all of Quackademia tries to fit their datings into these guys' chronology just because they said so. They don't have any source material to back it up. They just said that's how it is. Keep in mind the concept of Anno Domini dating was first used in 525, which just happens to be right before 536. The worst year ever to be alive is what scientists call it. It was earthquakes and volcanoes and everything. And they just happened to change from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar in 1582, right at the peak of Scaliger's life here. He was alive from 1540 to 1609, and he was actually a French Calvinist, so he was in on the Protestant movement. And then it gets really fishy because Dionysius Petavius is the one that finished the chronologies, and he belonged to the society. I'm just going to refer to it as the society. I'm talking about the Society of Jesus, the militant arm of the Catholic Church. The Jez, you can't say it's. Anyway, yeah, look up the oath that they take. Flay, boil alive, all this crazy stuff. But Scaliger was supposedly on the other side, the Protestant side of everything. They say he's known for expanding the notion of classical history from Greek and ancient Roman history to include Persian, Babylonian, Jewish, and ancient Egyptian history. This is when all of those melded in with the Catholic Church, specifically the Ashkenazi. So he wrote up his chronology, and I'm not sure if that's the same one we're getting today, because they say the results of his method of historical criticisms threatened the Catholic control and authority of many of the documents on which they relied. Long story short, when he released his chronologies, he was upsetting the powers that be, and then Gaspar Scopius, in the service of the society, published his book, which was a 400-page volume pointing out 500 lies in Scaliger's book. So they just went on the full offensive against Scaliger. It's been an information war for centuries and centuries, guys. It's whoever controls the presses. His enemies therefore aimed, if not to answer his criticisms or to disprove his statements, yet to attack him as a man and to destroy his reputation. They couldn't get him on the merits of his work, so they went after him personally, just like they do with everybody right now. And I just want to put up some images here, and notice the clothing and the setting of all of these biblical paintings. This is paintings of Jesus in a distinctly medieval setting. Our current idea of people in the Middle Ages and the knights in armor and all that come from the Protestant Catholic wars, and they say that those were really just kind of skirmishes. It's nothing like the hundreds of thousands of dead that we keep getting from historians. None of that has ever been backed up. And something that you definitely don't automatically make the correlation with, but the same time as the knights in armor is the same time as cannon fire taking down cities. I mean, they had cannons in official dating 1300s. So the society and the Catholic Church didn't like what Scaliger was writing, so they ran him out of town, destroyed his name. He wound up being exiled to the Netherlands for the rest of his life. And then Dionysius Petavius, the Roman name guy that works for the society, is known for carrying on and improving the chronological labors of Joseph Scaliger. In 1627, Petavius published the De Doctrina Temporum and later the Tabula Chronolica. And they say that these surpassed Scaliger's book from 1583 and prepared the ground for the works of the Benedictines. So this chronology got compiled, and then everybody has built off of it and wrote the same story over and over again, embellishing this little bit, and they still do it to this day. The oldest source material you're going to get, most of it is from the 1800s. The very ancient is the 1600s, but a big red flag in the world is I found a Spanish manuscript from the 16th century, 17th century, 1600s, and nobody can read it. They can't even read Spanish from 400 years ago. But anyway, Petavius laid the groundwork with his chronology, and then all the monks with their funny haircuts and in their cloisters redid copies and literally wrote down the dates of all of the events in history. So yeah, somebody out there may have a copy of Homer's Odyssey, but they don't have a date written down in there. And these guys are the ones that are saying it was 1,000 years ago as opposed to a couple hundred years ago. It took them all the way through the world wars to truly erase the artwork and the history, but they couldn't do it all at once. All they could do was just change the dates and come up with a different story, because there's going to be information out there that they can't control. They didn't have a chance to burn all the books yet. So our whole fantasy idea of the Dark Ages and the knights in shiny armor and the monks in their cloisters all comes from actual life in the 16th century. That I think is just a couple hundred years after the fall of Rome and the ancient Egyptians. Seriously, look up 536 AD, the worst year to be alive is what they call it. But it is all the exact same events is what we're told happened in the 13th century too. And if you read them side by side, which I will in a video at some point, you can tell that they're all talking about the exact same event. And then the Visigoths take over the civilized world, the Genghis Khans and the horde armies, and the Ottomans in the Middle East. Everybody took over for 800 years, and then all of a sudden Christianity won its way back into the world, and Roman culture won its way back into the world after being dead for 800 years. And then they find all these books like Strabo here, who was supposed to have died in the 1st century BC, but they republished a book from him 1600 years later. So the paper would survive through conquest by foreign armies, and they could republish this stuff, but we can't get source material from 400 years ago. And there's literally too many of these books to list. There's hundreds of these books like that. Guys, we got 3 writings from quote-unquote historians from all of the Greek Empire, which lasted for 500 years. 3 authors from a society that lasted supposedly twice as long as America has. Here's what Russian mathematician Anatoly Fomenko says about it. The ground-laying work of Scaliger and Petavius of the 16th and 17th centuries present the ancient chronology as a table of dates given without any reasons whatsoever. It's just declared to have been based on ecclesiastical traditions. But today it's believed that the foundations of chronology were laid by Eusebius and Saint Hieronymus, allegedly of the 4th century AD. Now we're looking at a painting allegedly created 1585 to 1590, and according to historians, it depicts a scene of Saint Jerome and his pet lion visiting the library of Eusebius. What we see here, however, is typically medieval scene of the Renaissance, and the library shelves are filled with books that look basically the same as those of the 17th and 18th centuries. Note the hard covers with the wide fastening straps. The artists of the 16th and 17th century have most probably painted recent medieval events of characters that were cast into the Dark Ages by the latter 17th and 18th century chronologists of the Scaligarian tradition. And guys, I've noticed this hundreds of times where they'll be talking about an event that happened in 300 AD, and then you'll see the painting that came out in 1834 about it. And Fomenko continues, few are aware that Scaliger and Petavius had brought chronology to perfection and absolutely precise datings, quoting the year, day, month, and sometimes even the time of day for all the principal events in history of humankind. And you guys have heard me make fun of this many times, where they'll say it was August 2nd, 1432 at 6 a.m. with a light rain and just way over the top detail. But Fomenko points out that for whatever reason, most modern textbooks usually only quote the year of the events and coyly omit the month, day, and hour. Okay, so more critics of the Scaligarian chronology. The doubts regarding the correctness of the consensual version aren't a recent phenomenon. They have quite a tradition behind them. N.A. Morozov wrote in particular that the Salamanca University professor de Arquila had proven that the entire history of the classical age was medieval in its origin. This is exactly the same point of view that was shared by a society historian, one of the J Guys historians. I bet he got in trouble. His name was John Hardoon, 1646 to 1724, and he considered the classical literature preceding the 14th century to have been written in monasteries during the preceding century. Just those monks that I was just showing you earlier, writing away in their cloisters for 100 years. The German Robert Baldolf wrote in his History and Criticisms in 1902, proving that not only ancient history, but even that of the early Middle Ages is a forgery of the Renaissance epoch and the subsequent centuries with the use of nothing but philological arguments. The main conclusion that English scientist Edwin Johnson came to in 1842 is that, quote, we are a lot closer in time to the Greeks and Romans than what the chronological tables tell us. Even Sir Isaac Newton took a stab at dating the ancient events, and where Scaligarian chronology puts the Egyptian Pharaoh minis at approximately 3000 BC, Newton suggested that this could be as recent as 946 BC, thus the shift forward in time comprises about 2,000 years. So, a long story short, a lot of smart people, even the ones that work for the Free Brickmen and for the Society of Jesus, have looked at the ancient datings and said, no, the chronology is off. This is not the way history has gone down. And I just wanted to throw this picture in and say that even the Roman Colosseum was officially destroyed in the 13th century at the time of the Black Death. So that was one heck of a bug that was taking down stadiums. We'll end off talking about the calendar. So the Julian calendar was implemented in the 6th century AD, like 536 AD, when the big catastrophe happened. And that calendar was supposed to have been in use all the way till 1500 AD, a couple hundred years after what they give us for the Black Death. But when they went to implement this, it actually caused riots. They say, to correct the missing days, that 11 days had to be lost. So they went from Wednesday, September 2nd to Thursday, September 14th overnight. And they say it was just 11 days. Keep in mind that history is taught to us from Darth Vader's perspective. So were they really rioting over 7 days? I mean, they paint these medieval peasants out to be absolute morons, superstitious, and yeah, they rioted over 11 days. Or was it a major change that they knew was BS? I think there was a little more to that. There are too many calendars out there to go by. Basically, every culture has been taken over by this system, but they have all had their own calendars. And it's pretty interesting that the free bricklayers go by the Anno Lucius, as in Lucifer, the light, the year of the light. And so they just add 4,000 to the number. I guess this is a few years old. So for them, the year is 6,020, which is pretty interesting because they add 4,000 years because that's the approximate date they came up with for Genesis. And that should tell you a boatload about what they believe, because, you know, I don't think the Freemasons, free bricklayers, are necessarily in charge of education like the society is, but the bricklayers count from Genesis, and I don't see any mention in there of evolution and Darwinism, you know. But that should tell you a lot. That's what the controllers think. And the idea of the ancient Rome and ancient Greek, like what I'm showing on the screen here, this whole idea is a product of the French Renaissance of the 16th and 17th century. But the painters that came before them, a couple hundred years, portrayed all of the images and the scenes from the Bible like this. Like what we would think of as the medieval times is what they're portraying as 0 AD. So I don't know the dating exactly, but the Roman, Egyptians, all those guys are much closer in time to us than what they are claiming. I would say that the reset was possibly as soon as 1480s, just before Columbus set sail. And they went over and saw the Americas. Everybody was wiped out, in my theory of things. And the Pope and the society decided they wanted to colonize the whole world, so they pushed the reset back in history and told everybody about the, quote, New World Americas, that all these were human sacrificing barbarians. And if anybody came back from the Americas saying any different story, then they were subject to the Spanish Inquisition. But I'll save that for a different video. Hope you guys enjoyed. See you on the next one. Static out.